Director of the Mathematical and Physical Sciences Directorate at NSF, so you may begin.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Dataway Webinar. It's an event we've been preparing for a long time with a number of people within NSF and a number of the program staff from different directorates from the NSF. In fact, all of the directorates are participating in this project. I plan to tell you today about the ideas we have about working with the community through a charrette process that I will describe in order to gain information from you all about how we might best develop a national infrastructure for heterogeneous data. So just going to the next slide, I hope that you're able to see the slides as I cycle through them. The basic organization of the discussion today will be, first of all, just the context for this about the challenges we find with large data, the kinds of outcomes we're anticipating with the activities of the charrette process, the framework for the activities going forward to develop an infrastructure, a national infrastructure of some kind for heterogeneous data, and the timelines for achieving this. So the first point is really just provide context for this entire operation. As I think everyone who's on this webinar will know very well, science is being completely transformed in terms of particularly the methodologies and the kinds of collaborations that are possible through data and computational methods. And we talk about many aspects of this. First of all, the fact that science can be done in a very integrative way at many different scales by the collection of different sources of data from theory, outputs of theory, from experiment, from simulations, from sensor networks, and so on. And if that data were open and shareable, then we would find new collaboration mechanisms, particularly at the very large scale, in fact, at scales that have never been possible before. So the collaborations that are not bound by organizational limits or traditional ones or national boundaries, and also to allow the integration of knowledge from different disciplines that would be needed to address complex problems. So we talk about the concept of data forests, where we have heterogeneous data of many different types from many different disciplines. They're geographically distributed. They represent a great deal of diversity of science and engineering disciplines. And also the idea that we would have different kinds of repositories at different levels. So there might be national scale repositories, there might be local repositories in individual labs, and so on. And somehow we need to find a path forward so that these different data can be made accessible and interoperable, not only across domains, but across funding agency and national boundaries. The next slide goes into a discussion about some of the challenges of heterogeneous data. So sometimes we refer to this as the long tail of science, which implies a very large fraction of the science and research community from different areas, and including individual groups, individual laboratories, and also even large-scale collaborations. But we're trying to differentiate this a bit from the very big science projects where you have huge amounts of data coming, say, from a single experiment or facility around which maybe many thousands of scientists are organized. So that's included in this, but that tends to distract attention from what is even a bigger problem, which is how to assemble data from the large distribution of scientists, which is the largest fraction of the science community, that are not in those kinds of very highly organized big science collaborations. And so this needs to incorporate all of that. So we need to think about simulations, experiments, observations from multiple disciplines, and so on, as I've been saying, but also to make these pulled together in a new way that can be connected, could be distributed, could be centralized, depending on the type of science. We need to incorporate all of this. Also, to think about incorporating data across many different length and time scales, also resolutions, different accuracies, and so on. And then we also, of course, need to have ways to describe that, whether we know what the error bounds on data are, what the provenance of data are, how data may have changed, that they might have gone from one group to another, and so on. And we need to find ways to track all of that. So just some examples, I'll pick on the materials science community. So I have a number of examples of different materials projects and visualizations from experiments, from simulations, and so on. And to point out how even in one discipline, we have many different approaches at many different scales, from the very tiny scales to very at molecular scales and all the way to macroscopic scales where we're thinking about materials and we're building things, for example, in automobiles or in buildings and so on. And so we're thinking about this problem having all of these scales, and somehow the different scales relate to each other in ways that is often very difficult right now for people to assemble the different knowledge that's characterizing each of these scales, but we want to be able to open this up and find ways to scale that by having the community access to the different aspects of it. So the next slide talks more specifically about a program that's been under discussion now for the last couple of years related to the Material Genome Initiative, which has been announced by the President's Office of Science and Technology Policy and multiple agencies, including NSF, as well as DOE and other agencies. And so here we're looking at ways very specifically to advance fundamental discovery in material science and how to connect that all the way into advanced manufacturing, into the industrial and corporate sector, and find ways to connect all of this. And so we know that in order to make progress in these activities, we need to have access to computational tools, to digital data, to output of theory and experiment, and we want to then integrate these in the best way to collect these data in the most homogeneous way that we can. I'm losing my words here, but the point is to provide data that provides visualization of correlations between different types of experiments and approaches to materials, to be able to manipulate that data, to connect that into workforce development so that people are trained, and also to connect this directly into the advanced manufacturing sector so that we can actually produce these materials that may be initially theoretically or experimentally developed computationally, and then to be able to produce them in a much shorter time than was ever possible before. Another example is optimizing the physical internet. So this has a lot to do with supply chain command, where we want to be able to provide supplies from many different parts of the supply chain, and then deliver things on time, taking into account all the logistics that are needed for distribution of physical materials. And this work, of course, requires information from many different places, of many different types, and we're trying to optimize the physical internet, as it's called in this example. So these are just a few examples. So what about the strategies to collect this information and to figure out a path forward? Because we know that, of course, these communities that we're talking about are very, very diverse, and typically they don't talk to each other or even know each other. And so we're looking to pull together a process called a charrette, which has been very successfully applied in the EarthCube activities here that NSF has been carrying out for most of the last year. And this process we're using now to apply to a broader set of data and scientific activities that span the entire set of research areas that the NSF covers. And so a charrette is a collaborative session in which a group of designers draft a solution to a problem. And in this case, we're talking about the problem of how do we support the collection and distribution, the curation, and so on, of heterogeneous data types. So our idea is that we will have a process where we will bring together both the designers from the computer and cyber infrastructure communities, as well as practitioners in the different disciplines, and have a process where different ideas can be brought together. We will identify the commonalities that we can. A number of ideas will be developed, and we will then take them forward to provide input into a national data infrastructure of some kind. So the anticipated outcomes of the Dataway charrette are, first of all, an engaged community that are increasingly contributing to an interactive website. So there will be, as we've seen with the EarthCube charrette, there's a very large community now that has developed and very active about providing ideas. And I think through that process, a number of groups that thought initially that they probably didn't have so much in common have discovered that actually they do. And so there's a convergence of ideas that will allow us, through this process and this broader heterogeneous data activity, to look for common strategies that will allow people to work together at these scales that we're talking about that haven't been possible before. Another outcome would be this growing repository of white papers that will define the elements of the issues. This iterative discovery process that through this website and the posting of these white papers and so on, people will be able to see what's being developed, and I think it will lead to consensus on best approaches. I don't mean approach, but best approaches. We recognize that multiple approaches will be needed. And of course, as integrated and sustained connections that are possible through this will be developed through this process of the Dataway charrette. So the next slide talks about what we've been doing to date in the areas of cyber infrastructure, and particularly at NSF we have this program called CIF21, Cyber Infrastructure Framework for 21st Century Science, Engineering, and Education. We have pulled together investments across every single unit at NSF. All directorates and offices are participating in this. And we are focusing on 4 areas in particular. Data-enabled science, I think, is the most comprehensive one that clearly touches every single area of the foundation and every community that we support. New computational infrastructure as well, touching all areas. Community research networks, where we are working to make it possible for the communities to work together, for example, through the charrette process. And then access and connection to cyber infrastructure facilities. So this brings in the notion of campus bridging, which is one of the outputs of the previous activities of the Advisory Committee on Cyber Infrastructure, recommending that we work very hard to incorporate the campuses as well. So all of this thinking is actually being integrated into this Dataway charrette. How do we provide this data? How will we collect it? How does it connect to infrastructure? How does it enable communities to work together? And how do individual investigators and groups on individual campuses and laboratories work together? So the current funding for data is in place right now, and you will see this, I think, in increasing focus of NSF activities going forward. This is just a sampling of some of the activities. The DataNet program, which was unveiled about already 4 years ago or so, which is aimed at long-term preservation and access of data. A new program just announced very recently, the Data Infrastructure Building Blocks, or DIBS, which is looking at smaller community activities that would ultimately provide the building blocks of the kind of national data infrastructure that we're talking about. Another program called Software Infrastructure for Sustained Innovation, or SI Squared. You may think of this as a part of the data puzzle, providing the software environments that are needed for communities to work together. The Cyber-Enabled Discovery and Innovation Program, or CDI, which was quite active for a number of years, pulling together teams to solve complex problems in science and engineering through cyber-enabled techniques. And then a very new announcement from a few months ago, related somewhat to the President's announcement on big data back in March, I believe it was, on core techniques and technologies for advancing big data science and engineering, also known as the Big Data Initiative. So this is a sampling of activities that are all leading to what we're talking about, but we need to do much more. So that's why the Dataway is a part of the process of figuring out what we should do to develop a national data infrastructure of some type. And so with the Dataway, we're hoping will help us build those strategies for much larger investments coming up, probably in the time scale of FY14 and beyond. So in particular, we see this as facilitating the emergence of broadly useful tools that can be used by investigators across many disciplines, and will support the evolution of collaborative communities around the use of data. So the elements of this. I haven't been very specific so far, so I'll just list a few of the specific pieces that we know are going to be important. So how will we collect data? How will the data be curated over time and made available and served to the community over longer periods of time? Typically, the NSF and other agencies have not dealt with this very well in the past, and so this is going to be much more of a focus going forward. Analysis of data, including new mathematical, statistical, computational, computer science techniques that are going to be needed for this, as well as visualization of the data. How will data of different types be integrated? What will be the descriptors of the data that allow one to integrate the data? And how will the data be found, searched, and so on? And part of the discovery mechanism for data sets will be, of course, search engines, but also the connection of data sets with the publications themselves that describe the work that has been resulting from the analysis of data. So we will be working also to find better ways to connect the data that are in your publications as well as data that we use to derive the results that are in your publications, to tag them, and then that can become another discovery mechanism. So all of these activities are being developed as we go forward, and we need help from the community to best understand what are the best ways to go forward. So over time, we imagine that initially there will be aggregated data around certain areas. It will be better and better networked as we go forward. We anticipate that it will continue to be heterogeneous, but that the infrastructure will evolve to allow us to better connect and serve up data and make the connections, the scientific connections between the different kinds of data sets as well. So the elements of the framework that we feel are important for us are developing a common infrastructure or common architecture for a distributed kind of an infrastructure that will allow effective, sustainable systems to support development of integrated and interactive services, for example, that cut across fields, to create interoperable digital access infrastructures, including open, extensible, and sustainable networks, to particularly foster collaborations and the sharing of observations and simulations and other types of scientific information, and particularly to facilitate not just the data transfer, but through that, the knowledge transfer as well among different disciplines. I want to go back to the one slide. I passed over this one, but I want to point out something we are actually very excited about, is much more deeply integrating research through the data revolution and education. And there are a lot of ideas percolating about, for example, to think about taking data that are being collected by experiments, by observational facilities, for example, telescopes, and through collections of data of all types, and directly integrating that into the educational process, not only at the university level, but also at the K-12 level. And you could imagine telescopes, for example, providing data directly into electronic textbooks now that are being used increasingly. And, for example, to think about school kids watching a degree on the sky and seeing where a supernova may have gone off or something like that. So not only sort of updating with the most up-to-date information, but also thinking about educating through the way of data that is actually impacting the way science is being done, and also providing that inspirational activity. So there are many ideas here that we're thinking about that will come out of this set of activities, and I hope through this Dataway charrette. So the timeline is, well, we've just released the Dear Colleague letter quite in the last few days. We're going to have a couple of events like this one today and another one. The charrette will occur on the timescale of October of 2012. We imagine shortly from that period of time that there will be short-term enabling awards to allow people to better develop ideas that will come out of the charrette activity itself. And then that will feed into longer-term development, and including the big ideas that I think will lead to a much larger set of investments, not only by NSF, but with partners both domestically and internationally as we go forward. So the guidance for the charrette, the planning process is open to everyone. We welcome a wide range of ideas and strategies. We will identify participants for this that consider the collective nature of the fields that we support, including the cyber infrastructure, the computer science, the software, and of course all of the scientific domains that would be benefiting, which we think would be literally all of them. So guidance for the charrette. So first of all, NSF will work with the community to prepare. So we have some months, I guess it's about 4 months from now. There will be an emphasis on engaging and connecting the research and the practice, not only the practice of research, but the practice of the development of the infrastructure. We will be participating with other agencies, not only ones within the U.S., but particularly in Europe and Asia. And we've had very specific conversations, for example, with the European Commission. And in fact, some of the ideas for this charrette came out of a joint meeting that we had with the European Commission and groups in Asia, in Europe, back in January this year. So that particular meeting had a lot of impact on our thinking of how we might go forward with this. So the next steps then, a Dataway website will be developed and will provide information on the charrette with guidance, preparation of instructions, frequently answered questions, asked questions, and so on. The charrette will be in October. This is just an announcement that we're getting started on this, and the final date will be announced through a Dear Colleague letter and on the website. A second webinar like this one will be held in August, and there's an email address that's been set up for questions and comments to be sent directly. So I think now I should take a break from talking and just say that we have staff who've been very deeply engaged in getting us to this stage that across the entire all sectors of the foundation, and we'll be ready to take some questions now.
If you would like to ask a question at this time, please press *1 on your phone and record your name. To withdraw the request is *2. Once again, please press *1 at this time if you would like to ask a question. One moment, please. Our first question comes from Hans Litaro. Your line is open.
This seems, I just spent the last 3 days with the EarthCube charrette, and this seems almost identical to the EarthCube. Is there any way you should combine these, or how are you going to be different from EarthCube?
Well, I'll take the first shot at that, and then I'll let others here who might want to chime in. So I think it's clearly inspired by the EarthCube, which seems to have really resounded resonated with the community, and certainly at NSF it did as well. But that one's been focused on the geosciences, and so we wanted to get a process that engaged all areas of the science communities and the engineering communities that we thought would be able to participate in this. So it's a similar process, but aimed at a much broader set of science activities. But we're anticipating. And we'll see what comes out, but we're anticipating that a number of commonalities will be developed or will be discovered through the charrette process.
Thank you.
Sure.
Next we have Diana Early from the University of Missouri. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. This is very interesting. One of the things that we've learned is the value that the librarians bring to this. You know, they've always been in the field of organizing and helping people access information. So I'd like to hear you speak to the role and involvement that you plan for people from that discipline.
Well, sure. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That is a very important part of what we've been thinking about over the last year as this data has become more and more important in the scientific endeavor. And so we have engaged a number of libraries, both in terms of making awards and also in terms of discussions about the future, particularly around the curation and the description of scientific data. And so we know, for example, that some data sets, the scientific data sets, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, for example, are curated in part by libraries, university libraries. So we anticipate that they will play a major role in going forward.
Can I follow up just a bit? We're part of what's called the Great Plains Network, which is like 7 states here in the Great Plains area. And the librarians in that area, along with the computer networking folks, have been working on solutions and proposals. So I guess my question is, those folks have been looking to like IMLS for funding, but would NSF entertain funding proposals coming out of the library discipline then?
I think the answer is yes. We have had proposals and have funded proposals to librarians in the past, so I think that we would welcome that, and I think that would be an important thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Next we have Devoti Banjuri from the Texas A&M University. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Devoti Banerjee. Just a quick question. I'm actually in mechanical engineering, but we do, go through multiple length scales in the computations that we do in our lab. We do CFD scale computations, for microfluidics, and then for nanofluidics we are using MD simulations essentially. So how could people with engineering background participate in a program that basically belongs to the math division?
I'm not sure. The last part of the question surprised me. So we anticipate that engineering disciplines will play a very important role in this charrette as we go forward. So the idea of this charrette is that we will take in input from different communities and then look at what we have that's in common and then try to come up with the set of activities that best span the needs that we have. So I don't see this as being at all limited to the mathematical sciences or statistics areas. This is really about all of the inputs that we'll need. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, if you were thinking about a specific solicitation, but this process that I'm talking about will be open to all. And not only do we welcome, but we expect that we'll have participation from all groups like this.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
We have a couple of questions on the chat. There are a couple of questions on the chat. This one, the first one is from, I'll just read the question. The Evergreen State College, Columbia, Washington title, Scientific Computing Manager. I think they were just giving information. Will MediaWiki technology be used, something like a Wikipedia?
So the answer to that is basically yes, although we don't know what technology it is, and I would say that it's not tremendously likely it's going to be MediaWiki, but there will be a collaborative website that has similar functionality.
Is everyone able to hear the other speakers? Yes, okay. So we think we answered that question. You can hear it.
We have several more questions on the phone. Would you like to continue with those?
Sure.
Gary Crane, your line is open for your questions.
Yeah, basically it was a question about the collaborative web space again. And I'm hoping that you're exploring options other than what was used by EarthCube. And the problem I think that I've heard many people in the EarthCube community express about the EarthCube website is that it's very difficult to find things, and that's the nature of the wiki, that it's basically time-stamped with some additional functionality with tags, but it's very hard to navigate once it reaches a certain size.
So I think any comments like this are very helpful to us as we're trying to determine what technology we're going to be using and exactly how we're going to go forward. So I think this is certainly a very good input, and we'd encourage anybody else with similar inputs to send them via email or by just saying them in a few minutes.
Let me just reiterate that point. I just think if people have comments on a better way to carry out the process, please send it, and we'll take that in.
Next, we have Sean Mahern. Your line is open. Sean, your line is open. Please check the mute function on your phone.
Yeah, thank you. At the President's big data announcement, it was clear that the challenges of exploring heterogeneous, distributed, non-centralized data is one that is not seen just by the National Science Foundation, but is across the various federal funding agencies. Is this charrette, is this effort expected to cross those different funding agencies, or is the intent initially, at least, to just look at challenges for the National Science Foundation?
I'm going to let Dan answer that. I'm saying that because it's going to be organized, of course, and operated by the NSF, but we don't anticipate restricting it. But I don't know how deeply other agencies would be represented there, for example. Dan, can you comment?
Not tremendously helpfully, but I guess I can say that we're very open to having participation from other agencies, and we've had some brief interactions with people from a few agencies at this point. We have not gotten to really a decision about how involved anyone else will be. But our intent is that we want to do something that really is nationally and internationally useful and is not limited to NSF.
Thank you.
Next, we have Hubo Kai. Your line is open. Hubo, check the mute function on your phone. Your line is open.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. This is Hubo Kai from Purdue University. I work in civil engineering. In our field, typically following the life cycle of infrastructure, we do have lots of data, field collected data, design data, and also some sensory data as well. And these data, they have a pretty strong temporal nature. And I'm just wondering if managing and sharing such data with the within the engineering field as well as across into other fields is part of this initiative.
Absolutely. All types of data that are valued to research in science and engineering are what we have in mind here. So I think that's absolutely.
For the type of data you're talking about, there may be challenges that are different than for some other types of data, but it's the type is probably the temporal type, not the domain that it's coming from.
Right.
All right, thanks.
Next we have Jill Gemmell. Your line is open.
I guess it's a question about scope and a different perspective. When you talk about data of interest to the sciences, I assume that includes social science, but is it envisioned that all the data will be specific to science? So, for example, would data aggregation and searching techniques that were useful for historians be out of scope?
I don't think so. I mean, particularly, I would be surprised that the kinds of things that were needed there would be very different from what, say, a number of social scientists might need or something. So certainly some of these domains are covered by NSF. The one thing that I would say we've discovered over time in discussing with different communities is that there is a surprising amount of overlap of what's needed, even though initially when you talk to people, they think they have very different needs from other groups. And we found this even within the Director of Math and Physical Sciences. We have a lot of different areas, astronomy, chemistry, physics, materials, mathematical sciences. They have very different sort of cultures, and yet when we really begin to talk about it, there are things that are rather common. So I suspect that what we're doing, that this process would be useful for all types, including the history communities, for example.
Well, that doesn't, yes, I would agree. I would expect it would wind up being useful for them, but would be having them involved in the, the upfront part, is that out of scope? That's what I'm asking. Would a group be helped or hindered by having historians involved in it at this point?
Yes. The answer is help. I'm looking at Dan, who's been deeply engaged in the organization of this. So this comes a little bit to the selection criteria for how we'll bring people into this activity.
Right, and I guess to some extent it depends on, I think one question is which people are going to contribute the kind of the examples and the ideas that are going to help the overall process the most. And I think that depends on how involved other agencies are to some extent. So I guess I have kind of mixed feelings a little bit about that, and I think it'll be determined really based on what other agencies are interested in participating and how that works. The tools that you're talking about, I think, definitely are needed to be incorporated in the long run, but whether or not that happens immediately or is more of a later phase is unclear to me right now.
Just one further comment on it, I would say that, for example, the director here of Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, which is headed by Myron Griffin as an historian, is very supportive of this activity. So that gives you an idea of the breadth of the science and research areas that we're interested in.
Let's take a few questions from online. The first being, will web services be available for posting and downloading?
We just up to Dan to answer.
So I think we want to have as many access mechanisms as possible, and exactly what those are and the priorities for implementing them and putting them together is one of the things that should come out of the charrette based on the inputs from the technologists as well as from the domain scientists that need to either supply or use the data.
Second question, how will NSF institutional continuity be managed across different personnel in different directorates as program managers rotate in and out and around NSF?
So that is sometimes an issue at NSF, but we have in this process in particular, we have a critical mass of people across every unit here who are highly dedicated to making this happen. So I think that this project in particular is going to be very strong and there will be a few changes of personnel, but the core here will keep this process going. I mean, it's critical to the future of science and engineering, so this process in particular is going to survive any changes of personnel.
We'll go back to the audio bridge. Operator, are there any additional questions?
We do have several questions. Next one comes from Todd Vision. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Todd Vision at UNC Chapel Hill. There are a host of programs that you mentioned in your slides, some of which are rather new, that seem to be dancing around various aspects of the space, from data maps to DIBs to SI squared to CDI to big data. Can you just clarify again what it is that you hope to emerge from this process that isn't met by those existing programs, some of which still haven't had any awards, so we don't really know exactly what their scope is?
Well, so let me comment on two of them in particular, say big data and the DIBs, the data infrastructure building blocks. So the big data solicitation that is running now will develop a lot of the sort of methodologies and the algorithms and so on that will probably be needed later on. The data infrastructure building blocks are meant to imply the building blocks of a larger set of activities or larger infrastructure, and so we think that we don't yet know enough about how to actually build out what would ultimately become a national distributed cyber infrastructure for all types of scientific and engineering data. And so we imagine this process as one that will build on the things that we've already started, as well as bringing in a fresh set of groups from all sectors of the community to discuss things and then make recommendations that we'll be able to act on to advise us for and to guide the development of much larger investments that will be needed, and we all see that this is going to be needed. And so I would imagine that this process will have very direct input into what kinds of solicitations and what kind of funding activities we undertake beginning at least as early as FY14 and perhaps even before that, depending on how quickly the results of this charrette are developed. So we see this as a really important sort of input gathering, and not just input gathering in the traditional sense, but more detailed than that, where people will come together and talk through this process that would never have really met before. They'd find common ideas. They would develop them out in ways that they wouldn't have been able to without this process, and then we'll take that in, and then that will guide the investment of much larger sums of money. And I mean, it will literally be hundreds of millions of dollars over time that will be needed to be invested to handle the data-intensive science. And so this will be very important for all of that.
I think just to add one point to that, I think we're seeing that the people that are getting awards under these solicitations, as well as people that are not and are just interested or have other ideas, will use this charrette and this kind of the follow-on Dataway mechanism as a way of interacting. So this is, in some sense, it's a communication across different solicitations and different programs as well.
Right.
The next question comes from Fidel McGahead. Your line is open.
Hello. I was wondering if, you talked about how different organizations come to play, and I was wondering what's the role of the charrette in terms of like research to practice. So I'm in industrial engineering. How much, overlap do you have between, developing some of the technologies and starting to implement them to start to make a difference? And then as you go forward, what limitations would you have in the existing research?
Well, I guess I'm trying to interpret your question in terms of, for example, you have practitioners who you may think of as, say, astronomers or chemists or engineers who have certain kinds of practice, and in many cases they're limited by their technologies in order to be able to work together, but they may not be the best ones to design and implement them. And then you have the people who focus on researching, deploying, and developing the infrastructures who need to be working more deeply with the practitioners on if you think of the discipline scientists as the practitioners. And so we imagine that there has to be a symbiotic relationship between these groups. And so not only are we looking across the different practitioners of different areas of science, but also the people who focus on the algorithms, the development of the services and so on that will serve them, and they're both research topics, and so we need to sort of cut across both ways, the different science areas that need this infrastructure and the methods and the services to do their science better, to have those collaborations, as well as the people who research and develop those infrastructures and services themselves. So we want to make sure that they're deeply connected, and so the charrette would be one way of bringing them together, not necessarily just to come up with the solutions, but to come up with the kinds of common problems that exist and maybe the beginnings on how to address them, and then from that we'll take into account all of that information and then figure out how to go forward.
Let's take a few questions from online. We're currently developing what we call a data commons here, which is focused on doing much of what you're describing. It includes data from researchers at our institution and related collaborative project data. Would initiatives of this type be within the scope of the Dataway, and it's publicly available or publicly accessible?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so Dataway will really depend on people that have problems and people that have solutions, and this certainly sounds like one of the possible technology solutions that should be brought in to be examined in different contexts and to try to understand what are the elements and how they can help address all the problems.
Next question. Is the development of virtual communities a priority in this program?
I would say absolutely. I think one of the primary goals of these kinds of activities is to allow the sort of dynamic creation of virtual communities through the sharing of data. And the best way to do that, I think we don't know, or the best ways to do that. So ultimately, this is about doing the science and providing the kinds of services and infrastructure that are needed to do that. And the creation of virtual communities around problems that may come and go over time will be a really important part of this.
Right. I mean, I think in addition to virtual communities, there's really just the question of communities in general. So one of the issues that we have is in trying to bring together lots of ideas from lots of different areas without necessarily having 10,000 people in the same room. So we really need communities to organize across technologies, across domains, and to have representatives of those communities that really can understand and represent their communities be the people that attend. And so that's certainly one of the things that we're going to be looking at when we put together the actual charrette itself, is trying to get people that represent communities, whether they're virtual communities or physical communities or domain communities, but then any types of communities.
Next question. How will this initiative engage with or dovetail with the Digital Preservation Network activities?
I would say it is being very complementary. You know, the aspect of the continuing emergence of Dataway, you know, the developments in DPN, again, as well as the developments that Ed mentioned in terms of the other NSF initiatives, I think could all be viewed in a very complementary manner. But they're also very much all continuing work in progress. So the answer is yes.
Next question. How will the charrette engage standards bodies such as WC3, OASIS, and others at their incubation stages about relevant standards that may not be on the radar of the charrette participants? Should the participant selection process identify such incubations and find charrette participants who already may be in the incubation effort?
Yes, I'll let Dan go ahead.
Well, no, so I was going to say yes also. Are we done?
So, both Dan and I said yes, so good.
No, it's a good point, and I think that's one where, at least my thinking had been that that the relevant standards bodies would be represented by people that would be coming to the charrette that will also be involved in those standard bodies, but that may not be the case, and it's good to have that pointed out so that we can try to approach some of those standard groups and make sure that we do get that involvement.
Next question. Is the URL known at this time for the website?
The answer seems to be no. We do not know it yet. We will tell you when we know it.
Okay. So the next, I guess the next webinar will be announced through another DCI. Right.
and hopefully at that point we will have a URL.
Operator, are there any additional audio questions?
We do have several more. One moment. Francois Gigi, your line is open for your question.
Hi, this is Francois Gigi at University of California, Davis. I'm involved with physicists and chemists and computer scientists in developing frameworks for verification and validation of electronic structure simulation data. I'm interested in the process to get involved in the charrette. In particular, do you encourage the submission of white papers before the October date?
Yes, so we definitely will. Once we have the website up, white papers will be part of the inputs that we'll look at in terms of actually trying to organize the event of the charrette itself based on what people are interested in, what they propose, and what examples they want to talk about. But they'll also be used likely in a way of trying to prioritize attendance at the charrette. Again, because we're looking for people that have ideas and want to talk about those ideas, and writing white papers is certainly an indication of that.
So the address at which these should be sent will be sent to the participants?
It will be in the next Dear Colleagues letter that will come out before the next webinar in August.
Thank you.
Next, we have Deborah Scott. Your line is open.
Thank you. This is Deborah Stott. I'm Chief Information Officer at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. We have a research computing organization within IT that is looking to provide common data management solutions and data collaboration solutions across all the sciences here. Could you please comment on how you think an organization that's doing research computing like us can participate in this and engage our area of infrastructure development with yours?
So I think when we think about data being stored in the long term, there's a variety of places that data can be stored. So in some cases we envision that there would be community repositories for particular scientific communities. In other places there are university repositories that are led by research computing offices. In both cases, as the previous question came up, there are a bunch of different people that have to be involved in the process of designing these things and putting them together, from the people that are creating the data, to the people that are building the technologies, to the people that are building and implementing the systems, to the librarians and data management people. And so I think that we will strongly be encouraging people from research computing offices that are interested in these problems to attend and to talk about what they're doing in their university successfully, and what problems they see at this point that should be addressed at a larger scale.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Michael Barton. Your line is open.
Hello, I'm from Arizona State University. My, I guess, kind of questions and comments kind of end up on either side of the pure data end, which has being addressed by DataNet and related initiatives, which I think are very important. One is that there's a lot of science that's being done today is generating large amounts of digital data. However, even today and in the recent past, there's a lot of data that's been generated in the social sciences, for example, that are not digital or only semi-digital. And so there's a lot of legacy data that'd be very important to have. Hopefully there'll be some kind of a way to, some kind of an emphasis on bringing this legacy data into this data commons. So that's part of a question, and it's always been difficult to get funding for. On the other side, even when we have these new data initiatives that provide accessible common data formats, there seems to be so far a lack of tools to generate workflows that can bring together different kinds of data and synthesize them. So I'm hoping that there'll be a big emphasis on the development of those kinds of accessibility tools. And then finally, and I'm hoping that also that there'll be an emphasis on open standards and platforms so that we all can see what's going on inside these tools. And finally, as a question, when is there going to be an announcement for the enabling grants you talked about? Thanks.
Well, let me just say, first of all, these are all topics that we anticipate are going to be discussed and brought up. I think it's going to be up somehow to the community to help best articulate to us how those topics ought to be dealt with. So we'll look forward to input like that going forward. In terms of when the enabling grants, which would be the sort of initial exploratory grants that might emerge from Charette itself, does anyone have an estimate of what might happen, how that might be done?
Well, I think in the slides we said in the November timeframe, and this again we're not I wouldn't say we're certain about this at this point, but we could use a similar mechanism to what's happened in OSU, which is to use the mechanisms that NSF already has for awards such as EGRs, as well as perhaps other small things that could come in. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily going to be a solicitation for this, but I think there will be discussion of this in the Charette as part of that, and part of the next steps as we finish the Charette.
Okay, because it's kind of short timing between an October Charette and a November submission date.
Right, but again, we think that these are not going to be kind of really large, complex things at this point. These are going to be exploratory ideas and
okay. Thanks.
We'll want to fund you to do things that before you forget what you talked about at the meeting. So.
Next question from online. Will NSF act as metadata catalog in the same way as FGDC maintains a clearinghouse for GIS data?
So I think the answer likely is no. I don't think that NSF is going to want to take on that role, but is going to want to encourage the community to take on that role. And again, exactly what the community needs in this case, I think is a question that needs to be discussed. So I can imagine that NSF will encourage and possibly financially would support activities even along these lines, but NSF most likely, I don't think, would actually want to be running something like that.
Next question. Will NSF be looking strategically at expanding the range of institutions involved, for example, expanding capacity and involvement of smaller institutions, broad geographic distribution, and diverse disciplines, rather than only major players?
That's part of the whole idea of this charrette, is to try to make sure that we do cover the many players that collectively make up the bulk of science, not just a few of the very highly organized and well-funded projects, for example, around particle physics as one example. So we want to make sure that we do that.
So I think in the EarthCube process, that's certainly been one of the successes at this point, is that there are the number of institutions that are represented is quite large, and they are not they're not necessarily institutions that have strengths in all areas, but they have strengths in particular areas where they can bring something into the process, and that seems to be something that the Charette process allows to happen.
Next question. Do you envision white papers to be formulated by individual researchers or large groups of researchers?
Yes. Yeah, both. And what we really anticipate is that people will come to the charrette, and through that process, collaborations of different types and ones that probably surprise everybody will emerge, and that those groups will also produce new ideas that they wouldn't have come up with otherwise. So it won't just be the individuals coming and then sort of pushing their own white papers all the way through to the end, although there might be some of that, but new things will occur, will develop through the process. We anticipate through collaborations that form kind of spontaneously.
Operator, are there any additional audio questions?
Yes, ma'am. One moment, please. Terry Moore, your line is open for your question.
Yeah, this is another kind of scope question. My question is our policy issues, major policy issues in scope, and I have in mind actually the question of dealing with essentially triage in data preservation. We have a situation where the amount of data is increasing exponentially, and it seems over time, it seems inevitable that some data will have to be deliberately discarded. maybe we would rather not contemplate that possibility, but certainly seems like something we should talk about, because sustainability is a real difficult issue for data repositories.
Right. There are various estimates that show that the rate of data creation is going up faster than the rate of disk creation, for example. So there are going to be choices that will have to be made. I think that's part of the game here, to figure out how we're going to determine what's to be stored and what's not to be stored, and curated, and then and so what are the criteria. So that's part of the discussion.
Right. So this already happens in a number of areas where you have hardware that's producing data, but you are not actually storing all the data from the hardware. There's some filtering or some analysis that happens before the data is being stored. And it seems likely that that's going to continue to happen, especially as the sensors and different systems start generating more and more data. I think to answer the other question, though, there's probably a number of things that we haven't talked about in this webinar up to this point that are more of the kind of the softer issues. And so I think policy, sustainability, governance are certainly some of those that we feel like are likely to be discussed and actually would be important to be discussed.
Thanks.
The next question comes from Zikuhi Liu. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Zikuhi Liu from Pennsylvania State University. My question is twofold. One is that you mentioned the materials, multi-scale materials from atomic scale to the project. So that means you can generate data from this domain-specific materials. So if I call that would be bottom up for domain-specific. But you also talk about the cross-cut of the different domains, right? So now, if we look at this process, so I think it's the shredded looks like, okay, can we form teams or concepts on that shred process? After that, we come up with the proposals to do the data generation or the population of data. So is that a kind of concept?
Right. That is it.
Okay. Cool. So that means that the proposals at the end could be either led by the domain-specific researchers like myself from material science, or from the computer science with more cross-cutting, but for material science would be more domain-specific.
Very likely so, right.
Right. So there's definitely a range of different data and technologies, from things you're dealing with bits that are the same across all disciplines to things that are very discipline-specific and things in the middle.
Yeah, but you want at the end that all the domain-specific data can merge in this big data structure, right?
Well, we definitely want to be in a state where domain-specific data can be used by people in other domains as well. Right?
That's right. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Next question from Marcio Fireman. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. This is Marcio Fireman from the Ohio Supercomputer Center. And my question is, we have been identifying several users in our community basically have very interesting data-driven cases which emerge from the health community, the biomedical community. And they definitely translate into other areas, they cross-cut into other areas such as engineering and physics and so on. And the question is how NSF envision this cross-cutting capabilities with the health sector, given that it's part of also the funding scope of NIH. I know that the big data proposal is a partnership, and I wonder if, again, you're envisioning a multi-agency look upon these issues.
So I think that the question's a really good one, because typically NIH and NSF do work together, but in certain ways where the biomedical, the health sciences are covered clearly more by the NIH. Although there are a number of exceptions. There are MOUs and programs, for example, within the mathematical sciences division here at NSF with NIH, and the science director has other activities on data analytics in the health sciences, so there are collaborations. So the extent to which that will be brought out at this charrette, I'm not yet sure. If any input on that would be taken in. we're definitely thinking about cross-cutting and working with other agencies, but I can't say how deep that connection will go at this particular charrette. Any other comments on that? No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Next we have Shauna Hurd. Your line is open.
Hi there. Just a sort of logistical question about the webinar that's expected in August. Is the intent to kind of repeat this for people who were not able to attend now, or is the intent to get further into larger questions like community and governance and so forth? Is it a number 2, or is it a repeat of number 1?
So we think that this will be, it'll mostly be similar. There will be some new content, again, because we should have a website at that point, and we'll have more information about the actual charrette. But this is, we view these both as really informing the community about what's going on and trying to get initial input into the process.
Next we have Gary Crane. Your line is open.
Yes, this is Gary from SURA. I've been involved in the governance component of the EarthCube charrette process, and I hope there's a good way to capture the work that's been done there, and that it doesn't have to be a complete repeat, because there's been a tremendous amount of energy expended by the EarthCube community in developing a framework or at least a proposal for a process of implementing a framework for the EarthCube process. And if this effort is going to be seen as requiring somewhat of a similar governance capability, I'd hate to see us repeat that process all over again.
Yeah, Gary, this is a lot of the same people at NSF here were involved in the EarthCube charrette are also engaged here, and so there will be a lot of overlap, and lessons learned and practices from the EarthCube will be useful here as well.
I mean, in some ways, we have the advantage of going after this, right? So we can try to understand what's happened there successfully and to improve on other things.
That's encouraging.
We won't start over.
Good.
We have no further questions in queue at this time.
Okay. Then I think we'll conclude. I want to thank everybody for attending and thank all the NSF staff who put enormous amounts of effort into preparing and getting us to this stage. And look forward to the next one coming up. So thank you very much.
And just to remind people that the email address for questions and comments is dataway@nsf.gov.
Thanks.
Thank you for your participation on today's call. You may disconnect at this time.